So now for my birth story. My due date was February 11th, and when I got to 39 weeks, I went to see my chiropractor. Mind you, I had been seeing my chiropractor weekly anyway, but I went for a chiropractor appointment and I got adjusted. Right when I got adjusted, I stood up and I told her, I said, "That felt great." And she's like, "It did?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that felt great." It was the same adjustment I had been getting for weeks, but for some reason, that adjustment really made me feel good. And so after that appointment, I went for a prenatal massage. And I had been getting prenatal massages weekly, starting around week 37. And so I went for my massage, and it was supposed to be an induction massage, but due to lack of time, I wasn't able to get the induction massage. Instead, I got a prenatal massage. I remember being on the bed and I felt myself contracting, but you know, I had been having Braxton Hicks for so long that I just assumed that they were Braxton Hicks. And looking back, I'm pretty sure they were, but they just felt weird. Anyway, I went home later on that night after my massage and, you know, ended my evening as normal. Went to bed, and around 11 o'clock, I turned over in the bed, you know, just normally turning over in my sleep, and I felt a gush of water come out of me. Now, I don't have any issues with incontinence, so I knew that it wasn't that I peed on myself, but for the most part, I could assume that it was fluid. And I woke my husband up and I told him my water broke. And he shoots out of bed and he's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I'm like, "You sleep. I'm going to go downstairs and try to distract myself." Nothing happened immediately after my water broke. However, I was uncomfortable anyway, and so I decided to just go on the couch and distract myself with some TV and try to get some sleep there. And so I put on something on Netflix, and the rest of the night I spent it trying to sleep, and I was going to the bathroom multiple times and my water was trickling. It wasn't a huge gush of water that ever came out. It was just like a trickle each time. And also, I think I also saw that I lost my mucus plug. I did begin to contract a lot at this time, and it was coming like maybe every 10 to 12 minutes, and it was consistent. And so I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to go into labor today, who knows? But I tried to sleep and get as much rest as possible. By the time the sun rose, my contractions had fizzled out. It just kind of went away. And so my husband gets my son up, we do our normal morning routine, and we talk about it, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to go into labor soon, but you know, whatever I was feeling last night is no longer happening right now. I continue with my day, and this is a Friday. I attend to my son, attend to the home, I run some errands, I went on a walk with my neighbor, I got my hair braided, I even did an Instagram live on my doula page. So I was still going about my day as usual. I would get contractions here and there, but again, they would come for maybe about an hour and then they would fizzle away. And then they'll come back, you know, a few hours later, and then they will kind of fizzle away. So I knew that labor was imminent, but I did not know when. I tried to just stay as normal and relaxed as possible. Friday night, after I do my Instagram live, I clean up my kitchen, I go to bed, and get some rest. Early Saturday morning, say 5 a.m., I wake up and I had been contracting in my sleep, but I was able to sleep through most of the contractions. But at a certain point, I couldn't sleep through them anymore. And again, they were about maybe every 10 minutes, and they weren't painful, but they were very, very, very uncomfortable. And I can sense that things were a little awkward. And so I told my husband, I'm going to go downstairs and try to get labor started. And he's like, well, I'm coming with you. And I'm like, no, there's nothing you can do. You just rest in case things do pick up. And so I go downstairs again, but instead of watching TV, I began to do some doula techniques on myself. And where I got this information from is from a website called spinningbabies.com. I strongly suggest that you educate yourself if this is something you want to learn more about. But what I decided to do was something called an abdominal lift and tuck. And it's exactly as it sounds. You take your hands and you clasp them together. You place them under your pregnant belly. You lift it up and you tuck the belly in. And you hold that. You hold that position. And the reason why I decided to do that at this point of my labor is, one, I was in early labor and I knew that. I knew that I was very much in the early phase of labor. And if I wanted to do any type of positioning, this was a good time to do it. And two, I can sense that my contractions coming and going as they were for the past day and a half, I can sense that maybe my baby wasn't exactly in my pelvis. And even when I was able to look at my pregnant belly at that time, I noticed that it was kind of, my belly was kind of like showing that the baby was leaning to the left. Like I can sense that he was, or he, we knew he was definitely a he. And we could sense that, I could sense that he was positioned to the left side of my belly. And so I felt that if I did a lift and tuck, maybe that will help get him engaged into my pelvis. And the key to doing an abdominal lift and tuck is you have to do it during a contraction. That's not the most comfortable thing to do, but again, if you're in early labor, hopefully you can tolerate it more than if you were in the throes of active labor. For 10 contractions, I did my lift and tuck. And I did it by myself. I tried to concentrate and focus as much as possible. I remember by the time I got to the 8th contraction, I was so over it. But I finished and I did my 10 abdominal lift and tucks. By the time I finished with the 10th one, I can feel that things were set in motion. I could feel that baby had, shifted to an extent. And I was so grateful because I felt different and my contractions felt different. It wasn't any less painful, but they weren't as uncomfortable as they had been for so long. And so immediately I prepared to labor quietly. I leaned over my birth ball and I was on my hands and knees, and I just kind of rocked on my hands and knees as I was laboring. I put on a movie, Fried Green Tomatoes, if anyone remembers that old school movie. But I put on a movie to distract me, and I was just laboring as much as possible. By the time morning really picked up, maybe around 7 or 7:30, my husband and my son were doing their morning routine. And I told my husband when he came downstairs that today was the day we were going to have a baby. He took care of my toddler while I tried to cope with labor. As he was attending to my son, I was just packing up my son's overnight bag to get him ready to stay with grandma. I was packing him his lunch and dinner and all the meals that he needed for the weekend. Now, around 8 o'clock or so, I noticed that my contractions had gone from maybe 6 minutes apart to suddenly 2 to 3 minutes apart. There was like no gradual trend. It was like 5 to 6 minutes apart, and then it went straight to 2 to 3. And I remember telling my husband, I was like, are they getting closer together? And he's like, yeah, they are. And I'm like, okay, you need to take, our son to grandma's house immediately. I call my midwife and I tell her, I was like, hey, my water broke yesterday and contractions are a bit more consistent today. And she tells me I should come to the birth center. My first labor and delivery experience was over 30 hours. And I know for first-time moms, it's very common for labor to be long. It's very normal for labor to be long. And I also know for second-time moms that labor may be considerably shorter than the first. However, because my first labor was so long, I kind of had it in my head that, you know, it won't be 30 hours, but it definitely won't be, you know, 3. But it kind of helped me mentally prepare for the long haul, because I don't know how this was going to be. So when my midwife told me to come to the birth center, I was like, I don't know. I don't want to go there and be there for hours and hours and hours. I don't mind laboring at home and then going to the birth center when I, you know, my body feels like I'm ready to go. And she said, no, you should come now. And so my husband takes our son to grandma's, and I am laboring on the toilet while I'm waiting for him to come back and pick me up. He comes back, we get ready, we go. It's about a 30-minute drive. We get to the birth center. I meet my doula there and my midwife and my birth photographer, and we are all in the room and just ready to go. My contractions are still pretty much the same. I noticed that when I was in the car, they kind of slowed down, but when I got to the birth center, it picked back up again. It's amazing what the body can do. So I get to the birth center and my midwife checks me, and I asked her not to tell me what my stats were. I did not want to hear about my dilation. I didn't want that to kind of cloud my mental frame of state. And so I just said, check me, but don't tell me the numbers. And so she checks me, and all I asked was, am I in early labor or active labor? Because early labor is usually detailed as 0 to 6 centimeters. And then active labor is like 6 centimeters and beyond. And she tells me, you're in active labor. And so I'm like, okay, great. And then I ask her about my station, the baby's station. But station is where the baby is positioned in the pelvis. Babies can be quite high in the pelvis, and that is when you are at -3, -2, -1. That's a little higher in the pelvis. And then 0 station is when baby is like right in the middle of the pelvis. And then +1, +2, +3, +4 is when baby is a little lower in the station. I'm hoping I'm making sense here. And so I asked her, I was like, well, what station am I in? Am I in a minus or plus? And she said, you're in plus. And I'm like, okay. So in my head, I have a bit more comfort because I know that labor is truly progressing and things are looking good. Later on, I found out that when she did check me, I was 6 centimeters. I was at +1 station, so baby was quite low. And I was 70% effaced. And so those statistics pretty much mean I was in active labor, and delivery could happen anytime after that. My doula provided a lot of counter pressure on my back and also put a lot of heat pressure on my back. And that was very helpful for me, and I asked her to do that. I was not experiencing any back labor. However, I found that the counter pressure really helped distract me. Another thing that helped me cope was inadvertently forming a ritual. And I'm going to try to not get into the weeds of this conversation. But as a doula, what I talk about with my clients is finding a technique, or letting your body find a technique that helps you cope with the pain. Because at times we allow the severity or the intensity of the pain to kind of wash over us, and we feel that we're out of control. But if we're able to kind of dig deep and find a technique that helps us, bear with each contraction, it may help us deal with labor better. There is a well-renowned childbirth educator called Penny Simkin, and she has this theory called the 3 R's: relaxation, rhythm, and ritual. And the point of the 3 R's is that if a woman is afforded the chance to labor on her own the way she wants, she will internally find a coping mechanism that helps her go through contractions, and she'll repeat that coping mechanism. There are so many different things women do. They moan, they groan, they find breathing routines, they may chant the same word over and over again. And for me, I did not plan this, I did not know this. I found great pleasure or relief, I think that's the word. I found great relief by hitting the top of a dresser. Like, I would lean over a dresser, my doula would apply pressure to my back, and I would just hit the top of the dresser with each contraction. Mind you, a contraction lasts for 1 minute, and the spacing can be whichever way. But for that 1 minute, I would just hit the top of the dresser. And I did that for like an hour. But that was my coping mechanism. There was one time I went to the bathroom and I stayed on the toilet to go through a few contractions, and I would hit the top of my thighs. So that hitting routine or ritual was helping me get through. I am amazed because I've never seen that before, and I don't know where that came from, but it helped me. My doula at this point, after about an hour of laboring like this, she said, "Why don't you get in the pool?" I wanted to save the water for the birth, right? I was hoping to have a water birth. And so she said, "Hey, if you go in and things aren't helping you, you can just get out." And I said, "Fine." So take off my shirt and I go into the pool. And this is the turning point of the story for me, because the pool was amazing. It was deep, it was warm, and it was huge. It was a very big pool. I get in and I sink really low. And I remember at one point, I wanted to kind of immerse myself in the water. I wanted to just dunk my whole body, the whole weight of my pregnant body underwater. I didn't, but the thought came to me, like, this feels so good, I could just go right underneath. The warmth of the water provided great relief. I will not say that it took away the intensity of my contractions, but it was another comfort and distraction for me. I continue hitting the edge of the pool as I'm going through contractions, but after maybe 2 or 3 contractions, the hitting doesn't help anymore. It's starting to get a bit more intense for me. Looking back is what I know. I know I was transitioning. I was at the end. I didn't really know it. I was baffled at the fact that I was already transitioning. I was thinking I was going to be there for hours, and I was okay with that. So the fact that I was beginning to respond in a different way shocked me. I remember groaning and moaning through my contractions. And I remember one significant point where I felt the baby kind of slide in my belly. Like, I literally felt the baby just slide. And I shout out, "What is that?" And of course I know it's the baby sliding in my pelvis or belly, but I was stunned at like the fact that I could feel that. It was so significant and distinct that it took me off guard. My eyes are closed the whole time, but I can imagine my midwife and the whole birth team is shuffling around, getting themselves together. At this point, my doula is still by my side. My husband is there too, and he's been there the whole time. He was phenomenal. This is when labor gets very intense. So after feeling that sliding sensation, I feel that the next few contractions are almost a blur, but I'm gonna try to piece them together. So I remember one point where I got a really intense contraction, and I kind of shoot out of the water, and I grab my back and I'm like, my butt. And again, I know what that means, but in my head I'm like, is this really happening? And I'm screaming, my butt. And my midwife, she tells me it's the baby, and I'm like, oh, and I'm like groaning, and I'm just so like I'm out of it at this point. But that pressure, that butt pressure was very, very real. But I also feel like it just happened with that one contraction for me. That one intense contraction brought a lot of pressure in my butt. And then after that, it was just pressure everywhere. I remember having another big contraction and I shout out, "Help me." And even thinking back to that moment, it's a very emotional moment because, you know, when women are in the throes of labor, and especially when you're in transition and you're at the very end and it's the turning point, the moments leading up to the baby's delivery, you do feel helpless. You may feel out of control. You may feel very confused. You may feel very at peace. Like the emotions vary from women to women. And so for me, I remember just feeling so desperate. I just was like, oh, this can't go on anymore. Like, I cannot do this. And so I remember just shouting out, "Help me." And, you know, nobody, I don't remember anyone responding, but I do remember that feeling of desperation. I don't know who I was asking for help, whether it was God, whether it was my husband, my doula, my midwife. I don't know what they could have done for me in those moments, but I do remember shouting, "Help me." And, you know, the contraction did end, but even that memory of desperation, it's still very, very, you know, vivid to me. So I'm in the very, very final stages, and there was one contraction that came and just rippled all throughout my body, and I shouted so loud. And I remember I would shout, and then I would shout, and then I would shout, like I was like building up in my agony in that moment. And I also remember as I was shouting, with each shout I could feel something in between my legs. I had not pushed at all this whole time, but in that moment I can feel the baby's head crowning. I even think that baby was more than crowning. Maybe it was kind of out of me at that point. My midwife, you know, she tries to calm me down. My husband tries to calm me down, and my midwife says, "Just turn over." So mind you, I'm kind of like, you know, leaning over the edge of the pool, and she tells me to turn over and to kind of like sit back. And there's like a ledge in the pool, and so I sit on the very edge, and I, you know, try to keep my legs open. I can feel the baby's head, and my eyes are closed the entire time, but I could feel the baby's head, and I stop shouting, and I just quietly try to calm myself, and I can sense that this was it. After the next contraction, they're telling me, "Mabel, push, push." And honestly, I don't even feel like I pushed excessively. I kind of just like closed my eyes and, you know, did some pushing, and baby just slid right out of me. And this moment this moment is probably one of the most baffling moments of my life. I have watched so many women give birth in person and online through videos, whether it's in a hospital, out the hospital, in a pool, on a bed, in a chair, in a car. I've watched births happen so many times. And for me, at that moment, to have gone through an unmedicated birth, I feel like that final contraction, a part of me had gone somewhere. Like, I feel like a part of myself traveled, and I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like I traveled to the edge of my world to just grasp at any strength that I can muster for the final point of my labor. And by the time I opened my eyes, the baby was on my chest. And so if you were to look at my birth pictures, you will see that shock on my face. It wasn't staged or anything, obviously. I was stunned. I was so stunned that I don't even think I was mentally present. And that's not in a bad way. It's just like, it took a while for me to kind of center in on what exactly just happened. And so they put the baby to my chest, and I am like mouth open, eyes open, silent. Mouth open, eyes open, silent. I'm just staring at everyone in the room. I couldn't talk. I couldn't process. It was just beyond me. I felt like I had reached some kind of pinnacle, and I was coming down from that high. And I was like that for a long time, like a good solid 3 minutes. I couldn't even look at the baby. I was just stunned. I'm holding the baby and I'm just looking like, like, I don't know, like a mad woman, I guess. And so finally, after the haze of surprise starts to wean away, the first thing I said was Jesus. Like, that's all I could think of. It had to be God that just took me through the intensity of what I just gone through. The first words were Jesus. And then I looked down at the baby and I'm just like, oh, I'm in love. And it was an amazing experience. Amazing experience. I can't even begin to describe the feeling. I've tried right now, but it was everything that I could have dreamed of. I did it. And if I get the chance to tell more about my pregnancy and trying to conceive journey before I even had my firstborn, you will know that it took a lot for me to get to where I am today. And it took a lot of no's for me to be able to get a yes, to even have an opportunity to try for a vaginal birth. So having had a vaginal birth the first time, and that went well, even though it was medicated, and then for me to have a vaginal birth the second time and it be unmedicated, and I did it again, it was a lot of emotions in that moment. Like, wow, my body can do this. I can literally do this, despite what all the doctors said I could not do. And so I was so enamored. I looked down at my baby, and I even remember at one point like licking his shoulder. And I know that sounds so odd, but it was so instinctual and primal. Like in that moment, I just wanted to just devour him. He was so beautiful, and his cry, and he was on my chest, and he was heavy, and it was wonderful. And we were waiting for the delivery to find out the gender of the baby. And so you all know it's a boy, but in that moment I did turn him over and checked him out, and we found out it was a boy, and I shout out, "It's a boy!" And it was a wonderful moment. And we stayed in the pool for some time, and me and my son, we just cuddled and bonded, and I'm laughing with my doula and my husband and my midwife, and it was such a special moment. And it was my moment. I didn't have anyone rubbing on him, trying to clean him up, or I didn't have anyone, bothering me. It was just my moment, and it was special, and I was glad. The next part of my story is a turning point, to the point that I do have some notes that I want to reference, because I want to honor the experience and be as transparent and open about it as much as possible. Before I talk about what happened after I delivered my son, having our water birth, I do want to scale back and talk a little bit about my first pregnancy and delivery experience, because that experience ties into this one. After I delivered my firstborn, mind you, it was in hospital. It was a vaginal birth. It was after a very, very long labor, but we did it. And I was able to deliver him vaginally, and I was so, so happy about that. After I delivered him, I did experience a complication. When you deliver in a hospital, it's very common for women to experience something called active management. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, and I would strongly suggest you refer to any of the links in my description box that may help you understand more about what I'm about to say. But simply put, active management is when they use medication to help with the delivery of the placenta. So after you have the baby, there is the delivery of the placenta. And usually in hospitals, they will utilize the use of Pitocin to help the placenta to expel. And the hopes of using Pitocin is to help it come out quickly, but then also to prevent hemorrhage if that is to happen. And so many a times women don't even know that Pitocin is being used. It kind of is so procedural that it just happens. In most cases, you should be informed that that is going to happen, and you should have the ability to consent to using Pitocin to deliver your placenta. But for me, I don't recall being told that, but I don't think I would have objected, to be honest. So I deliver my son, and we go on to deliver the placenta. And immediately after I delivered the placenta, I began to hemorrhage. It was a severe hemorrhage. I don't remember much because it was so severe that I immediately began to almost lose my vision and lose my hearing after the placenta was delivered. The blood loss was so swift and plentiful that my midwife immediately enlisted the help of an OB. There was a bunch of people in the room trying to help salvage what was going wrong. I did get a blood transfusion. I had to get 2, maybe 3 bags of blood to replace what I had lost in that moment. It was scary. It was scary, but it wasn't traumatic, because even as it was happening, my midwife and nurse and OB, they were talking to me and explaining everything. My husband was probably more so scarred because he's seeing it firsthand, whereas I'm just kind of experiencing it. But it was scary, and to be honest, hemorrhage is one of the leading causes of maternal death in the world. And so it's not something to play with. It's not something to shrug your shoulders at. And it doesn't happen to everyone, but it can happen. And being in a hospital really helps with preventing that. I will also add that even out of hospital, women may be at risk of that, and midwives are trained to help deal with that as much as possible. And if it's beyond them, they will seek out a transfer where the woman will leave their home or birth center and go to the hospital for extra support. Hemorrhage can happen in the hospital. It can happen outside of the hospital. It can happen if you are having a medicated birth. It can happen if you're having an unmedicated birth. It can happen if you receive Pitocin. It can happen if you don't receive Pitocin. So there are a number of factors behind hemorrhage, behind active management of the placenta. To be honest, I'm not a pro at understanding this, and I may spend a good chunk of my lifetime reading about this because that's what happened to me the first time. And with my second born, I had a similar experience. Throughout my prenatal care, my midwife knew of my history of hemorrhage with my firstborn. Again, we cannot really pinpoint why I hemorrhaged with my firstborn. It could be the fact that, I had a long labor. It could be that my uterus was tired. It could be that I was carrying a big baby. There are a number of reasons behind women hemorrhage. Okay. But with my second born, that was a huge point of conversation with my midwife. And we decided to do active management outside of the hospital with this birth center experience. And the goal was to kind of prevent the hemorrhage from happening again. And the goal was that we will just get the placenta out and, hopefully all will be well. It's very much different from most women who deliver out of the hospital. To be frank, most women will receive expected management. And what that is when you just kind of wait for the placenta to come on its own, and it does, and you deliver the placenta and you go about your business. Active management may be an approach for women who may have, a different kind of history or birth experience. And I suggest that you talk about it with your provider, whether you are in the hospital or not, and just learn more about this delivery of the placenta. As much as I knew about the delivery of the placenta, I agreed and worked with my midwife and agreed that we will do active management this time. Hopefully it'll prevent another hemorrhage. And so what that is that even outside of the hospital, some birth centers have access to Pitocin and IV fluids, and they utilize that if and when necessary. And so right after I delivered my son, I was given a Pitocin injection in my thigh. And the goal of that injection was to help get the placenta to work its way out. And so after I got the shot of Pitocin, we moved from the pool to the bed. And I'm on the bed and, trying to push this placenta out. And I push, and I push, and I push, and I position myself in different ways to deliver the placenta. It would not come out. My midwife was trying to assist me by kind of gently tugging the cord as I pushed to kind of like, she'll tug and I'll push and hopefully it will get the placenta out. It wasn't working, and I can sense physically, that I was losing some blood. I was getting a little more tired, a little more weak, but that could also be because I had gone through labor and I'm tired and weak anyway. But for about 45 minutes, we worked actively to get the placenta out, and it would not come out. And honestly, if you were to receive, Pitocin in that moment, that should help expel the placenta. And for me, it did not help. And so after that, all that time had passed, my midwife suggested, hey, maybe you should transfer to the hospital to get more help. And my husband and I talked about it briefly, and we agreed that I will transfer from the birth center to the hospital to get some assistance with this placenta issue. It wasn't clear if it was trapped, or it wasn't really clear what was going on, but it could lead to a dangerous situation like another hemorrhage. And so we call the ambulance and I am transferred to the hospital. My husband comes with me to the hospital, and I leave my son at the birth center with my midwife, doula, and my friend. She was there as a birth photographer. It wasn't a hard decision for me to make because I knew that my son would be safe at the birth center and they will attend to him the way they need to. They even had donor milk, so even though I didn't get a chance to breastfeed in the first hour, he did receive some donor milk, and he was well taken care of. But I went to the hospital and I was admitted in the ER, and they immediately attended to me and took out my placenta. I did have to go in the OR for that to happen, and to be honest, I'm not clear if the placenta was taken out in pieces, or if they just scooped it out and they took it out as a whole. I'm not really clear exactly. I'm waiting to get my operation notes to kind of review that, but I did have to transfer to the hospital, it was a worst case scenario that we discussed when I was pregnant, and that worst case scenario happened. And it really, it really kind of messed with me afterwards, because the hope is that you deliver the baby, you deliver the placenta, and you go about the rest of your day as normal. But things happen. Transfers are, a part of the experience if you are out of the hospital. It's not a part of everyone's experience. It's very rare that women have to be transferred. But I did, and I went to the hospital because for me and for anyone delivering outside of the hospital, we understand that the hospital is a resource. So I just wanted to express that because I had a hospital birth the first time that went well, and even though it went well, I still made the informed decision to birth out of the hospital, understanding my options, understanding the benefits, and understanding the risks. So I share this story not to scare or compel or urge anyone to do anything. The only thing I can insist is that wherever you go, wherever you choose to deliver, and whomever you choose to support you in that delivery, make sure you are coming from a place of knowledge and education and trust and preparedness. I strongly suggest that no woman should go into birth blindly, whether you are with an OB at your local hospital or whether you are birthing in your bathtub. Make your decision from a place of comfort and readiness and informed decisions. And make sure that the people on your birth team will prioritize you and give you the individual care that you deserve and need. And I know that I'm looking at my notes, but I made that decision knowing and trusting the process of birth. And I understood that things can go awry. And things went awry. And it was still hard for me to process. Not because I expected things to be perfect, but because, it's your body and it's going through so much in such a short time frame. And you just want to make sure that you're safe and your baby is safe and that the people who are supporting you are taking care of you the best way possible. So I don't regret having a water birth. I strongly suggest it for women who are low risk. I strongly suggest it for women who prefer or desire midwifery care. It was the best birth experience compared to my first, and I was well supported in my first birth. But my second one was phenomenal. So much so that immediately after the whole placenta thing was taken care of, I looked at my husband and I was like, that was great, I would do it again. And I know I sound crazy and I may just be a birth nerd, but to be honest, if I was to have children again, I would definitely have to deeply consider a lot of things about my mode of delivery and place of delivery. But for the most part, I would do a water birth easy. I would do a home birth. And I know y'all probably think, this girl crazy. She just says she bled out and she wants to birth at home. But what I'm trying to say is that I felt most protected and safe and at ease outside of the hospital. But if I have to go to the hospital the next time, I'm okay. And I know how to advocate and seek out the right support. I just wanted to add that there is no failure in birth. Birth is not a competition. Okay, birth is messy and complicated and beautiful and joyful and painful and intense and everything. and you can experience all of that in a hospital and outside of a hospital. And if you do desire to have a home birth or a birth center birth and you have to be transferred, it's okay. It's okay. There is no failure in that. You did not do anything wrong. You did not make any poor decision. You just utilize your resources as you see fit. And so I just wanted to, add this, point so that women can get the full scope of birth and understand what it may look like and make the decision that you feel is best for you. So I have a quote that I would like to read, and I found great connection with it. There's so many birth quotes out there, but I want to share this one. It says, "Birth is about much more than the wriggling of a tiny body out of a larger one. When we birth, we don't just birth babies, we birth ourselves, we birth our families, and we reshape lives." This is a quote by Sarah Wickman, and I find a lot of truth in that. So many times we look at birth as medicated versus unmedicated, or we look at birth as vaginal versus C-section, or hospital versus home. We look at birth in these extremes or these ultimatums, and it's not necessarily about that. Birth is about how you grow from it, how you connected to it, and how you connect to your baby, and how you connect to yourself as a new mother and a new individual, a new woman as a whole. And so I hope that we look at our birth experiences as something that we can grow from, something that we can encourage and teach one another, a way in which we can inspire and educate our friends and girlfriends and families, and how we can also process that experience and build from that as we move forward in life. And I am so grateful for the birth experiences that I have had, albeit it may have had its own complications. They're still very much a source of pride and gratitude for me. So if you would like to connect with me and learn more about what I do and how I serve women in my community, you can follow me at Within Her Birth Services. I am on Instagram. And you can also comment or, leave a question or an inquiry below in the comments of this video, and I'll do my best to stay in touch with you. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something new.